Hey, Sasan here, Proteus, free resources for people to help them with debate stuff. I got a hot take here that's gonna probably annoy a lot of Lincoln Douglas middle school and high school coaches across the country. Um, so remember, if you are a student watching this, that whatever your coach says is right, and that they're your coach and I'm not your coach, and you should listen to them and you should not listen to me in any instance in which we disagree, because I'm not your coach and I can't help you understand things or explain myself better. In case you don't understand me, you should listen to your coaches. Listen? Oh, that's not a word. Okay. Now, here is objectively why your coaches are wrong. I, right now, am judging at the California State Middle School Championships, which I think there's actually 2 championships, and they both claim to be, like, the real championships. It's like a whole mess. But whatever, I just judged 2 rounds of LD, and the same thing happened in both rounds. So I figured I have a little bit of time, and I'm trying to make content more regularly. So here's the deal. LD rounds really often go something along these lines, right? The affirmative comes up, and the topic in question here is suspending civil liberties during health crises, health emergencies is important. Whatever. The AF will come up and they'll be like, hey, what's up? I'm the AF. My value is communitarianism. And what that means is that you should do stuff that's good for the community. And here is a source that says doing stuff for the community keeps people from dying, and that's why it's good. Anyway, here's a bunch of contentions that have nothing to do with communitarianism and don't specifically link into communitarianism, whatever that is, in any significant way. Then the negative will come up, and they'll be like, yo, what's up? I'm the neg. I'm a 12-year-old child. And my value is libertarianism, because you should not tread on me. And here are my reasons why libertarianism is good. It's because when people don't have rights, sometimes they die. And here now is a bunch of arguments that have nothing to do with libertarianism. And then I'll watch the round, and then I'll make a decision, and I'll vote. And I'll be like, hey, here's some feedback. Here's some things you did well. Here's some things I think you should focus on. Any questions about the round? And in both instances, and pretty often in judging Lincoln Douglas, I'll get asked the question, what'd you think of the framework? And it's kind of like, dude, what framework? Like, that's not framework. Framework establishes how the round gets evaluated in some demonstrative way, right? Like, okay, let me explain that. We have a video on topicality. I think it's called topicality and other procedurals. And then it might, in theory, in parentheses, say, like, this is theory. I don't remember what I called the video. And then we also have another video on answering theory. Now, I bring those up not because value debate is, well, value criterion clash is a theory debate, but because in the case of a topicality, you have a definition which is framing the round. And you're saying, hey, we fundamentally disagree on how this round should be evaluated because of this definition. So here is what I interpret the proper definition to be. Here is what my opponent interprets it to be. Here's why those two things don't work together. They're not the same. There is a distinction between them. Now, here are some great metrics for a good, fair debate with good clash. Let's apply them to these differing interpretations of this word, and by that we will determine which is the one that we should use. You don't get that with criterion debates. You just get, here is my criterion, and then you get, here is my criterion, and then maybe a criterion gets dropped, and then they're like, you didn't vote on the dropped criterion, but like, there's no, why would that entail winning? It's just, at that point, it's just an argument with kind of a link and an impact, right? Like, oh, right, yes, caring for the community is good, or right, of course, taking away civil liberties is bad. But there's no specific link that says the AF's advocacy takes away liberties at that scale. You're just saying, oh, rights are good, and I had an argument that said rights are good, and they didn't specifically refute it, so why didn't I win? Because it was framework. Well, it's not framework, because everyone's arguments works under everyone's framework. And here's why. The reason is because we have another video on this also. You should just watch our videos. It's about writing arguments from the bottom up. And the point is that the problem is these cases are written from the top down. People sit down and they don't know what their case is yet. But the first thing is the value and the value criterion. And they're like, okay, so what's a good value and value criterion for the negative? Well, I'm arguing in favor of liberty. Why don't I say libertarianism is my value? And then they'll go on and they'll make arguments that are just, they hadn't thought of them yet. And they're just arguments that are in some way good for their side. And then once they find those links, they'll be like, well, what are some impacts I might be able to get off of that? And then they may or may not write like fully fledged out impacts. That's not the way good cases should be written. The way you should write a case is you think of what are the best impacts that I can reach with this side of this topic. You do some research, and once you feel like you have a pretty good access, you find that access to that impact, you cut the cards, you cut the links, you flesh out the impacts, you make that large impact be as descriptive and persuasive as it possibly can be, and then you do your uniqueness links, whatever, and then finally when you're done, you have a fully written case, then you write your value and your value criterion. Why should those things be last? The reason why is because in almost every Lincoln-Douglas debate I see, each person's value would include saving lives. And not in no like nuanced way, right? Like what I mean is that like every instance of saving lives counts under this criterion, right? So like, hey, if I say I save a bunch of lives, would that count under communitarianism? Sure, communities benefit from you being alive. What about libertarianism? Right, being alive is a prerequisite to all of your liberties. So yeah, it counts. All right, so then it just becomes a debate about who saves the most lives. So what was the point of your value criterion, right? The AF has communitarianism and the negative has libertarianism, but I don't think about that when I'm the judge, because both sides agree saving lives functions under their framework. And neither side gives me some sort of nuance that says like what type of lives or what way of saving lives is unique to their framework. So at that point, all I need to look at is who saves the most lives. So whether it's like for a libertarian reason or through a libertarian-ish link, or a communitarian type link, it doesn't matter. The most lives get saved by this side. You agree that that works under your framework. So that side wins. Which calls into question the point of framework to begin with, which is why I say in the title of this video, here? Does that say it here? That your frameworks are useless. Why are they useless? Because you're trying to include saving lives and not exclude anything in particular, and your opponent's also going to talk about saving lives. So then what's the strategy, right? You're just kind of like picking an impact to your side that isn't attached to any link or uniqueness. That's not how framework's supposed to work. I won't say it's not how it's supposed to work. Maybe that is how it's supposed to work and it's just dumb. But here is the strategy behind how you should, by my recommendation. Again, everyone other than me knows more about debate. If they disagree, I'm not interested really. If you have thoughts on this, I'm happy to discuss in the comments. But whatever. If you have a teacher or someone who says something different, or if you are a coach and you think something different, then that's awesome. You can completely disregard this. Here is how I would write a case. Write a case. Have your impacts be specific. Have your impacts be specific and something that the other side has a harder time accessing. So, yeah, maybe it's lives, but maybe it's lives with a sort of magnitude focus. Maybe it's lives with a focus on what sorts of people are being affected by this. Maybe it's live with a time frame focus. Maybe it's lives with a probability focus. Maybe it's not lives. The point is, pick something and know what your impact is. Know it well. Know what your impact calculus at the end of the round is going to need to look like. What are you actually advocating for? What is the thing you are trying to make the judge care about? Okay, once you have that, the purpose of framework is to, or it could not be lives, by the way. It could be whatever, econ, whatever you want to say, the categorical imperative, or whatever it is. But the point of categorical imperative is more framing than an impact. But the point is, the purpose of your framework is to draw a neat border, as neat as you can, around your impacts and justify in some way that these impacts count and these impacts are good, but no other impact matters. And justify that in some way that is not just I'm the negative, right? Justify it the way you would justify a interpretation on a topicality, right? Where it's like, no, objectively speaking, I'm not just saying like, oh, this definition would help me because I'm the negative. I'm saying this is the best and most fair way of evaluating the round. Your framing should say this is the best way of making a moral, ethical, valuative policy decision. Whatever it is you're trying to do, say this is the best way of looking at it for these reasons. Have some cards and be like, and that means we should be looking at this kind of impact and no other kind of impact. And you usually do that because your side is not saving the most lives. In a definitive, very easy to prove way. If your side is proving the most lives, then just go with util and just be like, well, it doesn't matter what the framing is. I'm going to save the most lives, and 99% of my opponents are going to agree that saving lives is important. So if I'm saving the most lives, then great. But let's say you had econ impacts, and you didn't save the most lives, but you're like, whatever, econ is important too. Who doesn't like it when the line goes up? You then need to have framing that tells me why we should care about econ stuff and not concern ourselves in this debate with questions of lives for some reason, right? Or maybe you are going for lives, but you don't have the magnitude or the scope impact going for you, right? So then you need to talk to me about why time frame is the most important impact, or or like way of evaluating things, or you know, probability, whatever, right? I was in because we do this kind of thing when we do Parley value rounds in Parley. And I was in a value practice round that was a really similar topic to this. And it was like the mental health effects of the pandemic should be prioritized as highly or higher or something than the physical health effects, right? And I was on the side of mental health effects, which you're gonna lose, right? If you allow lives lost to enter into the debate, you're gonna lose. Why? Because dead people don't have good mental health, but you can have good or bad mental health and be alive. And it's probably, I don't know, maybe, I'm not trying to put words in anybody's mouth, but maybe better than being dead. So what do? You run impact framing in some way that excludes the ability for the other side to say, hey, but isn't being dead bad? And in this case, the value framing, I don't remember what the exact value and criterion were, but it came down to actionability. It was like, frame the debate around, okay, what's actionable for an individual? So yeah, like, and that seems like it could apply to physical health and mental health, right? But by making it be about actionability, it's like, okay, I found some evidence that said, hey, too much of the focus in the discussion around what we do with mental or with COVID or whatever has been based around what governments should do. But that's really not productive and it's costing tons of lives. We should focus more on what individuals should do. So my framing is that, hey, we should focus on what's actionable at the individual level. So whatever we're advocating for should be something that an individual can do, because that discussion is the most important discussion we could be having, right? See how I'm kind of justifying it the way you would justify a topicality interpretation, and not just like, I'm the neg so I like mental health, you're the af so you like physical health. But by doing that, I get to say, hey, like, whether you get a vaccine or not is definitely the grounds of the, I don't know, negative, I guess, in this case. But we shouldn't really be talking about things like more vaccines should be made available, or like more testing should be made available, and all of these things, because that's not actionable by an individual. That's like a government policy, and that kind of just leaves individuals sitting around waiting for something to happen, right? So you get to say, here are the things that you can actively do to improve your physical health in a pandemic, and we'll consider the impacts of that and whether that should be more prioritized. Or here are the things that you can do on an individual level to improve your mental health during a pandemic. And that helps me a lot, because it's not that much you can do to protect your health in a pandemic that people aren't already doing, right? That isn't already prioritized enough, right? Like, most people are not going to get a vaccine, or that they can and they do right away, right? But there's plenty of things that people don't notice or don't care about with their mental health that maybe should be emphasized more. Maybe people should be informed on the mental health tolls that a pandemic takes and things that they can do. So that frames the debate in my favor, because I get to say, no, your impacts, which are great, don't count in this debate, because I have evidence that says we need to frame this discussion in a different way in order for it to be productive, or in order for it to be an ethical decision for the judge to make, right? That's the point of framing. You don't frame your arguments in, you frame your opponent's arguments out. It's not difficult to frame your arguments in, you just have to be broad or talk about a regular impact, right? If it was hard to frame your arguments in, then it would be really hard to say that your arguments work under a framework that your opponent came up with without your arguments in mind, but people end up arguing that every round anyway, right? So it's clearly not a challenge or really strategic to say, like, how can I think of a framework that will include my arguments? Just make your arguments, then try to think of a framework that will include your arguments while excluding your opponent's arguments. That is the strategic way of doing framework, in my humble and I am sure woefully misinformed opinion. But in the meanwhile, framework debates just don't matter if you're not doing this, right? If saving lives applies to both frameworks, then I'm going to vote on saving lives, the largest impact, based on who has the best access to it, usually based on however I want to decide that, because people aren't doing the impact comparison to be like, well, you should care about probability more, and here's why I'm accessing a more probable way of saving lives, even though it's not as large a number, right? People don't do that level of work. They just say, like, I save lives. And at that point, I don't care what your value framework was, unless you're about to come up and say that saving lives doesn't count under communitarianism, which people don't. So that's it. That's my little 20-minute rant. 21 and a half. We got some other stuff coming up, but I'm also trying to put out more little content like this, because it doesn't involve a lot of editing. I'm not even using like the good camera right now. You can see it's a little grainier than it normally would be. But I don't know. I feel like more regular content is better than extraordinary content like once a year. So here you are. Catch you next time.